Hey, folks, coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered for Wednesday, December 5th, 2018, broadcasting live from the Porter Center for Media Studies in St. Petersburg, Florida. George Herbert Walker Bush, the 44th President of the United States, is on his way back home to Texas after a moving ceremony at the Washington National Cathedral, attended by all former living presidents. We'll talk to the president of Hampton University, where Bush spoke in 1991. Meanwhile, the Republicans are doing their best to undermine the results of the November elections in Michigan, Florida, Wisconsin, and North Carolina. We'll talk to people on the ground in Wisconsin and North Carolina about the devious plans of the Republican Party. The value of a home in a black neighborhood is worth nearly $50,000 less than the same home in a white neighborhood. There are severe consequences of this so-called segregation tax on those black neighborhoods. Dr. Andre Perry is here to break it down. Also, another crazy-ass white woman in hot water for calling a student a bad name. Yeah, some say prick, but we know exactly what it means. We have the recording. I don't know what's wrong with them. And the New York Times published an opinion column with the headline, "Why We Miss the Wasps," in relation to President George H.W. Bush. No, we don't. And trust me, you don't want to miss me taking the writer to school when it comes to this particular issue. Folks, it's time to bring the funk on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
Whatever the biz, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, y'all. It's Roland Martin, rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now. Martin.
Today at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., more than 3,000 invited guests, including all living presidents, met there for the funeral of President George H.W. Bush. He, of course, the 41st President of the United States. Among those there, of course, his son, President George W. Bush. Also, his son, Jeb Bush, former governor of Florida. Eulogies from George W. Bush, Bush biographer John Meacham, and also former Senator Alan Simpson all took place. Everyone agreed not to trash talk Donald Trump, even though he was there, gave pretty much a cold response to the Clintons, only shaking the hands there of President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama as well. The contrast throughout the entire funeral was obvious in terms of when Bush was president compared to what we are seeing today. And so all across, of course, here's a video there of the former living presidents there. Also, of course, you had the vice presidents, Dan Quayle, who served under President Bush. You had Joe Biden, who was there, in addition to Al Gore. All of those vice presidents were there, as it was a packed church. George W. Bush talked about the final words from his father, where he got emotional. You see right there where he was tearing up, laughing about, of course, some of that eulogy, but also tearing up because the final words of his father was, "I love you." And so today, of course, was a national day of mourning for President George H.W. Bush, a national day. Donald Trump called for that. The body of President George H.W. Bush is flying back to Texas, where there will be a funeral tomorrow at the Episcopal Church St. Martin's in Houston at 11 a.m. Central. Then there's going to be a private burial at Texas A&M University, where the Bush Library is located, and he will be buried next to his wife, Barbara Bush, former First Lady, who died 8 months ago. Of course, we've had several African Americans on the show on Monday and Tuesday talking about the legacy of President George H.W. Bush. Joining us right now is Dr. William Harvey. He, of course, is the president of Hampton University, where George H.W. Bush spoke there at one of their commencements in 1991, of course, while he was still president. How you doing, Dr. Harvey?
Roland, I'm fine. How are you?
I am doing great. So first and foremost, your thoughts and reflections on President George H.W. Bush. Him and his family were huge supporters of the United Negro College Fund, of course, supporting HBCUs. What do you recall about his visit, giving the commencement speech there at Hampton University in 1991?
Well, let me just tell you that I thought that President George Herbert Walker Bush was an outstanding individual. He was a man that, from my point of view, helped HBCUs more than anybody that I know of in my 41 years. He helped us in so many different ways. For an example, he came and spoke here at Hampton in 1991. And it was a wonderful visit. The amount of money to HBCUs went up from 89 to 1990, over $118 million. He encouraged consortium agreements among HBCUs and research institutions out in the Midwest to try to get HBCUs to do more research. He encouraged and directed that more money be spent on science and STEM fields. So he was just a terrific fellow that supported all of his life black colleges. When he was a student, undergraduate at Yale, he founded, not just being active, but he actually founded the UNCF there. He was always very supportive of HBCUs right up until the time that he passed. I can even say to you, after he left office, during my 25th anniversary here at Hampton, and this is my 41st year now, the MC came to the mic and said that they had a surprise. There was a video tribute to me from him. I knew nothing about it, and I was just as surprised as everybody else. He said some awfully kind things about me, but he was also very humorous, because at the very end, he said to the trustees who were present, Dr. Harvey has worked tirelessly for Hampton and the nation, and said he's due a sabbatical. Why don't you give it to him? Well, that got a big laugh, and then the next day, the trustees did give my wife and me a sabbatical for 9 months down the Hilton Head. What I'm saying is that he was very supportive. I can give you a lot of examples. Let me give you another. During his tenure as president, the then Solicitor General filed a friend of the court brief with supporting the state of Mississippi against the black colleges there. When I found out about that, because I was on the president's advisory board of HBCUs, I sent a note to the chief of staff saying that I'd like to see the president, and he agreed. And I asked the two other presidents to go with me, including Jim Cheek at Howard, and he allowed us to come in to see him. So I said to him that, Mr. President, I know of your support for black colleges, and I was a little surprised that your administration has filed a friend of the court brief for the state of Mississippi. And he says, well, Bill, I don't think that that's true. And he said, in anticipation of your visit, I asked John Sununu, who was there as his chief of staff, and he says, John, is that right? So Mr. Sununu gave him a piece of paper that he let me see where he said that wasn't correct. So he looked at me and said, Bill, I just don't think that that's true. I said, Mr. President, with all due respect, it is true. Well, he got a little upset, and he said, Boynton, he was talking to C. Boynton Gray at the time. He said, find out what the story is and get back to me. And he said, Bill, can you come back at 2 o'clock today? I said, of course, Mr. President. So I went back, and I was ushered into the Oval Office, and when I walked in, he was laughing. He said, Bill, I should have known you knew what you were talking about. He said, but that's being corrected as we speak. We will withdraw that friend of the court brief on the side of the state of Mississippi. These are just one, two of the several things that I could talk about that shows that he supported HBCUs.
Well, we certainly appreciate having you on the show to offer that perspective. And here's the deal: I've had some. I'm looking at some of our comments here on Facebook and Periscope and in YouTube, and and people are commenting right now. And let me be clear. I had like one guy, I guess, Ron Ortiz said, "Who cares about this guy?" The reality is, this is a former president of the United States. Our job is to cover those things that are good, those things that are bad, those things that are indifferent. That's exactly what we do as well. And so it's important for us as a show that speaks to African Americans that talks about George H.W. Bush's legacy as it relates to African Americans. Whether it's we had Louis Sullivan on the show, Armstrong Williams on the show, Fred McClure yesterday, but also we've talked about the Willie Horton ad. We've talked about, of course, some other issues as well. And so our job is to cover all those perspectives, and that's why we have you, Dr. Harvey, to give that the personal recollection. And again, I had not heard of that story you just told about his DOJ taking the position in the Mississippi case, and by you mentioning it to him, he then by rescinding that. And so, again, that's also an important part of history that also needs to be told.
Well, Roland, may I say something to your guest that said, who cares about him? I want you to know that I and hundreds of thousands of other people, because he supported historically black colleges and universities. And we're at a time now when we're not getting the kind of support that we ought to get. And here was a president who did support us. So that's why we should care about the hundreds of thousands of young folk that are graduating from our colleges right now. So I can tell you, I care, and I'll tell the truth. The fact is that he did not support the '64 Civil Rights Act. He did say that he made a mistake and that he regretted that. Now, how many of us don't make mistakes? I can tell you that I probably make more than most. But the fact is, what all of us should do when we make a mistake, we should admit it. We should say that we aren't going to do it anymore and move forward. And I think that that's what all of us, that's a mature way of acting. And as you know, Roland, more than I, and I enjoy you when you come to our campus. I enjoy your show because you tell it like it is. Well, we need to tell it like it is and don't sugarcoat it. He helped black colleges, which means he helped young folk. And I'm as pleased as I can be that he did that. I'm pleased that he listened. And in that one instance that I gave, that he reversed the Solicitor General in that regard. So, yeah, there are those that care about black kids and black colleges, and he happened to have been one.
All right, then. Well, Dr. William Harvey, we appreciate it. And I like that backdrop there. You got at Hampton University. See, that's how you do it right there. Always have that branding going.
Well, listen, Roland, you've been here, and we enjoyed you, and I want you to come back. And I'll just say, without blowing any smoke up your pants leg, we enjoy you and your wife, and come back to see us. And you keep on telling it like it is. And let me say this before I sign off, if I can. Mm-hmm. We need more people who will reach across the aisle, because everybody thinks they're right. The left thinks they're right, the right thinks they're right, and the fact is we need to learn to compromise, and we need to make sure that we try to work for the people and try to make this a better life. And as long as we can do that, then I think that that's what all of us should try to do. And that's certainly what I'm going to try to do, and that's what I preach and teach to the young folk here at Hampton.
All right, then, Dr. William Harvey, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, now introducing our panel, A. Scott Bolden, former chair, National Bar Association PAC. Also, Reverend Derek McCoy, Executive Vice President for the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. Dr. Cleo Monago, socio-political analyst and activist. Cleo, I see the hat you got on today. First I said, who the hell is on my show with a Make America Great Again hat? So then when they zoomed in on your hat, I was like, yeah. I said, leave it to super black to wear the hat, make Black America woke again. So
indeed.
Appreciate that. So Cleo, first of all, I want to start with you. Of course, you had the state funeral today, and you had, of course, all the former living presidents there. But it was real clear that it was nice of the Bushes to invite Donald Trump, even though he trashed the family on numerous occasions. But it really was listening to the eulogies, listening to the folks. The kind of contrast that was there between the 41st and the guy who's there now.
Well, it must have been amazing. It must have been a very nuanced experience. And it should be, frankly, when we're talking about President Bush, because he was nuanced. I mean, we just heard all this praise about how wonderful he was. And I remember Willie Horton, and I remember Keith Jackson, and I remember Clarence Thomas. But I was a tyke at the time. I was a young child. And maybe my memory
Yeah, okay.
And maybe my memory just doesn't grasp all of the wonderfulness that he embodied. But it's interesting that he supports the HBCUs. I didn't know that as well as I've been hearing it for the past few days. But also some of the HBCUs really make sure that they do what they can do to get funding. And sometimes what they do to get funding is not necessarily fully affirming of black people on a cultural basis.
Reverend McCoy.
Quite honestly, when I looked at the eulogy, I thought it was a tremendous thing. I looked at his son, who gave the eulogy to a man who was his dad, and then looked at the legacy of then his brother and the other people that were around him in the family. My take was I get the HBCU side. I think Dr. Harvey did a tremendous job helping us understand some of that history. We all know there's probably tethered history throughout in terms of his life and what he did. But if we don't look at this like it is, meaning this is a man's funeral, who has gone through his entire life, what can we learn from his experiences? I think the former president, George Bush, who then eulogized his dad, told us a lot. He told us about a young man who looked at his dad as a mentor, who looked at his dad as a father who was there consistently, who had a wife who he really cherished and honored. There was a lot of lessons learned. And I looked at it, too. I said, you know what? Wouldn't it be great if young black men and women could look at that and say, man, that's something to look to as a model that we could look at in our own family lives, just in terms of, you can't look at everything that they did, but you can look at it and say, man, what a unit that he did and what a unit that he was and how he taught his family. And so I looked at it, I just took it as a lesson as a dad myself and said, wow, that's quite a legacy he's leaving.
Yeah.
Scott Bolden.
Roland, he was an incredible human being vis-a-vis public service. And despite our disagreement with a number of his policies, the reality is the most powerful part of this funeral was how we compare George W. Bush or George Herbert Washington Bush to our current president. You didn't have to trash Trump at this funeral in order to understand the dichotomy and the comparative that all of us were seeing and feeling. Whether you like Bush or not, when he led on the international stage, he was an expert. On the domestic stage, he had his challenges. But the reality is that with Trump on the front row, speaking to the Obamas, which I was concerned whether they would respond one way or the other, and not speaking to the Clintons on the far end and where each of them were placed. I got to tell you, the organizers had some challenges, but Donald Trump drives that negative narrative. And it was just, in my opinion, out of place for him to be there because he represents so much that's different and the opposite than what George Bush, the deceased, former president, represented to all of us. That's human decency, whether you agreed with all of his politics or not.
Well, again, the Bush family chose to invite him there.
Yep, I know. I got you. I got you.
About being decent.
He's the president.
Right.
So, absolutely.
And look, the current president can learn something from him, perhaps.
He ain't
and something
interested.
from that.
Yeah, but it was odd for him to be there because he had attacked every other president.
Absolutely, but you got to give him an opportunity to learn.
The most operative word there,
But
perhaps.
look, it was odd because he had attacked every other president in the front row, not just politically or policy-wise, but personal attacks.
Well,
has no place for it.
Well, here's the deal. Bottom line is there. You hope you learn something through osmosis. I doubt
Osmosis.
it. The Bush family will put their patriarch to rest tomorrow. Again, Texas A&M University at 6 p.m. And so the National Day of Mourning, of course, ends tonight. Let's go to our next story, folks. The Republican Party, not just Donald Trump, is just trying and succeeding in ignoring election results and the will of the people. First, with voter suppression, then rejecting registrations as well as ballots. And if they lose, trying to reverse the outcome of elections with legislation. Case in point right now, what is happening in Florida, delaying the implementation of Prop 4. Of course, that was the law that was passed that gave the voting rights to the formerly incarcerated 1.4 million people, Desmond Meade, and he, of course, fought for that for 10 years, and now they're trying to delay it. In Michigan, Republicans who control the legislature are poised to give themselves the authority to stand up for the GOP, really backing laws if they think the incoming Democratic governor and attorney general are not adequately defending the state's interests. In North Carolina, trying to rush certification of an election before their election fraud is fully exposed. In Wisconsin, where last night the legislature, cut the power of the incoming Democratic governor and attorney general. Talk about absolutely crazy. Joining us right now is Wisconsin State Democratic Senator Lena Taylor, one of two black senators in Wisconsin. Senator Taylor, glad to have you back. First of all, on Roland Martin Unfiltered, we talked to you, of course, when I had News One Now and
Yes.
TV1. And talk about just absolutely crazy what is happening there. You were up all night watching the will of
Yes.
the voters being grossly overturned by Republicans in Wisconsin.
Exactly. Roland, first of all, thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be with you again. It's always good. I love watching you. I love hearing you. I love seeing you on Facebook. But yes, what happened yesterday was just completely an assault on democracy. It was a power grab, as many people will say, but they were democracy gangsters. That's what they were. And they literally tried to silence the people. They did, very candidly, strip the governor, strip the attorney general of powers and give it to the legislature. And it really is a separation of powers issue from my perspective. And it is also blatant retaliation for the southeastern portion of Wisconsin that said, we've had enough is enough, and we need a new direction.
Well, and not only that, again, Republicans in North Carolina did this, and I kept telling people, national media, pay attention. Other states are watching, and that's exactly what is happening in Wisconsin because they are angry that they lost at the ballot box.
Exactly. As well as it's my understanding that they're trying to do the same thing in Michigan. One of my sorors, I'm in an AKA, texted me yesterday and told me to connect with one of her classmates from law school who is in North Carolina and said that they had this experience. So it was truly my intention to do that. But I was on the floor then, so I'm going to still follow up to figure out what can I do as we go forward, because this battle is not over. I mean, they've definitely done some things that will have to be challenged in the court. But part of my concern is they've also stacked the courts, both in Milwaukee County, other places in the state. I mean, we have our top cop that's just been assigned to the court by the governor, who is riding in the back, and a co-conspirator to this nonsense, and has agreed to sign such legislation. And it clearly shows that they're connected to their donors. They're connected to interests of everybody else other than the people. So, yes, it's happened in the places you've said, but it's also happening in Michigan. And we need to make that connection. I wish I had paid attention to that. I think I didn't realize that we were going to, take back the gubernatorial seat. I'm glad that we did. I didn't realize that we were going to take back the AG seat, but I'm glad that we did. And because people came out and early voted, they want to silence people's ability to early vote. And in particular, they want to make it where they shrunk, where we can only early vote for 2 weeks.
So last
24
question
hours
for
a day,
you.
though.
Obviously, we saw the recall of Governor Scott Walker, which he beat back. These Republicans in the legislature, does it allow for a recall of any of them? Can voters demand that or push for that? Because I'm quite sure Wisconsin voters are not happy seeing what they're doing right now, especially based upon the protests we've seen.
That is correct. Wisconsin voters were there. They locked the people out of their house. They were there saying, this is our house. They also wanted to lock them out of the gallery. They locked them out of the committee, and then they wanted to lock them out of the gallery. Yesterday, we had a pushback on that, and we got it the way that so that people could be there. So I do believe that people want to push back. A recall is possible of individuals who have at least been in office 1 year after their election. And people should pay attention. This is Robin Vos, the Speaker in the Assembly, and the Majority Leader, Scott Fitzgerald, trying to flex and to suggest that they are going to govern, and trying to push back on Evers to say that he does not have the strength and he is not going to be a good governor, and trying to handcuff him so that he cannot do the work that he ran on and that the people said that they wanted, and the reforms that they said they wanted. So I believe that the people will continue this process. They were there outside the door. People were there till 1, 2. One guy was there till we finished. There were 2 individuals in the gallery there until we finished. There were people in the hall. So I do believe, yes, Roland. And if people want to help, people in Wisconsin to do that, please do. We need that help.
All right, Senator Taylor, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much. And keep up the fight.
Thank you so much. And we will.
All right, thank you. Folks, in North Carolina, we've been covering the absentee ballot fraud allegedly conducted by GOP operatives. New documents show they were offering money for unsealed absentee ballots that could be later filled in with votes for Republican candidates for Congress and sheriff. The man at the center of the alleged election fraud is Leslie McCrae Dowles, and he may have been doing this for years. The Charlotte Observer newspaper, in an editorial, called for a new election. A North Carolina political science professor began looking into these absentee ballots right after the State Election Commission refused to certify the results. There were allegations of election fraud. That professor is Dr. J. Michael Blitzer, professor of politics and history is it Catawba College?
It's Catawba College, yes.
Guys, I want to make sure I pronounce it right. And he joins us right now on Roland Martin Unfiltered. First and foremost, what was the spark for you to start looking into these weird ballots coming out this particular race?
Well, you're right. Last Tuesday, when the State Board of Elections chose not to certify the 9th, that was an immediate signal. The vice chair at the time came out and said there are improprieties in the area that I come from. He is from that area of Bladen and Robeson County, Cumberland County. And so I decided to start looking at the data to see, okay, we've got the election results. We know how people voted in terms of election day, early voting, and also absentee by mail. And I looked at the absentee by mail for all of the counties, and there are 8 counties within the district. 7 of them went for the Democratic candidate, Dan McCready. Only 1 went for the Republican, Mark Harris, by a 61 to 39% split, and that was Bladen County. Now, the North Carolina State Board of Elections releases publicly available information about who has requested absentee ballots, and they don't tell you who they voted for, but they tell you which party affiliations those voters are. I looked at that data and found that of that 61 to 39 split, only 19% of the voters were registered Republicans, meaning that literally every unaffiliated voter, about 38% of them cast ballots by mail, had to vote Republican, plus have some crossover votes from registered Democrats. Now, in rural North Carolina, that could happen, but the likelihood was extremely low. That's when I started digging into the data, wrote a blog post, and honestly, it has taken off from there.
And we've heard Republicans in North Carolina, all across the country, talk about voter fraud. No, this is election fraud. That's what Correct. This is.
Exactly. This is election fraud. We have heard, and in fact, the state of North Carolina is considering the implementation legislation for a constitutional amendment that was passed, which the state of North Carolina and its voters approved for a voter photo ID. They're discussing the legislation now. All of the controversy around that legislation has been about we need to protect the integrity of the vote system. We need to make sure that people who are not registered or legally allowed to vote can cast a ballot. That is one side of it. But this is election fraud. This is taking someone's legal ballot and vote and manipulating it. That is something that is on the other side of the issue, and I think has really come to the forefront. Yes, voter fraud is very rare. It is minuscule in terms of the issues, but to have this kind of systemic and what appears to be long-term election fraud process going on in these counties is something to be concerned about.
And now we're hearing about who this guy was and how he had been doing this in numerous elections. I mean, so essentially what you had is a clear, defined operation going Professor, here's what I want to know. Where are all the righteously indignant Republicans now? Because, they made lots of noise. And I've said this nationally. Where is Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House? He was complaining about election results in California, but he says nothing about what's happening in North Carolina. Mitch McConnell is saying nothing. What is Tom Tillis saying, the senator from there? What is Barr saying, the senator from there? What is the former governor saying? It's amazing how all of a sudden they're quiet when it comes to voter fraud, election fraud involving Republicans in North Carolina.
I'm an independent analyst, so I will defer to partisanship in terms
of
presenting it in such a way.
Are any of them speaking out?
I have not heard any commentary from some of the elected major Republican officials. We have had the state GOP executive director send out a conference call earlier this week claiming that Democrats were attempting to steal this election. I think as somebody who has observed North Carolina politics for 16 years and has studied political science for nearly 30 years, the choice of making those words steal an election is unfortunate.
Dr. Michael Blitzer, we surely appreciate you joining us, and thank you for your great work exposing what is going on here. And I think we've got a long way to go, and I would not be surprised if a new election is called.
I would not either. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I want to go to my panel right now, of course. So I want to start with you first, Reverend McCoy. Again, when you see what's going on there in North Carolina, all those Republicans I talk about, it's amazing how quiet they are. It's amazing how Chris Kobach, who lost in Kansas, who was talking about voter fraud and with his commission saying nothing, Trump saying nothing. What Republicans are doing in North Carolina is flat out theft.
I understand what you're saying. I'm the first one to say, if it's wrong, it's wrong. And you got to call a spade a spade. So there's no shame in what I'm going to say because I'm straightforward. If it's a wrong thing, it's a wrong thing. I think when you look at those issues with the McCrae guy and what's been going on, they are questionable. So I would say there needs to be investigation in that regard. I would also say, before we jump to the accusations that nobody's speaking out on and nobody's saying nothing, perhaps we need to investigate a little bit further and say, hey, what are you guys saying and what can be done? Because I don't think, just looking at it, I'm just saying, hold up, just looking at it.
No, they've done a lot of investigating already. If I may, Roland, let me just say this. I've looked at local reports in preparation to be here tonight, and not only were they sloppy about it, which tells you they've done it before, this Dallas individual, right? But a local camera crew from local news went out and interviewed two North Carolina County residents who had said that Dallas's people came out, they gave them an unsealed absentee ballot. One couldn't read, and the other one couldn't remember who he had voted for, and he had only voted for in two races, but he had filled out the ballot. They had helped him fill out the rest of the ballot, and he couldn't remember who he had voted for. And so there's a substantial amount of evidence, empirical data, yes, but real hardcore witness testimonial evidence here that if the state or the commission investigates it, you're either going to get a new election or you don't count all of those votes, which means the Democrat is not stealing the election, it's righteously giving that individual the election. They'll try not to do another one if they can on the North Carolina law, but otherwise the better way to do it is just throw out those ballots that you have that are seriously questionable.
Leo, we have covered the shenanigans, the evil things the North Carolina GOP has been doing, and I'm saying it for a reason, because what they have done by having a supermajority is callous and shameful, and the reason I am blasting them by name for saying nothing, even if you want to say wait for an investigation, you at least could have the decency to say, hey, there's a problem here, let's get it right. But they don't want to do that because this shows how Republicans have been involved in a wrongdoing. Cleo?
Well, not only does it show wrongdoings on the behalf of Republicans, the people that you're talking about who won't say anything benefit from this fraud. This is something that's helping them. So they're not going to, and obviously Trump cares nothing about honesty and being appropriate and integrity. So they're not offended by this anyway. And the bottom line, as I said, it's good that you're blasting them, because somebody needs to blast them, because there's people all over the media landscape who I think are on their side as well, who are very neutral in terms of how they talk about the incident. But the bottom line is that the people that you're talking about who won't say anything are not going to say anything, because all this corruption is in benefit to them.
And let's talk about not saying anything. Let's look at Prop 4 in Florida. Of course, that was a law that was passed by the voters that will restore the voting rights of the formerly incarcerated. It passed by a huge margin on November 6th. But guess what? The Republican Secretary of State in Florida, Kenneth Detzner, and the outgoing Republican governor, Rick Scott, they want to delay implementation of the law. So the Republican-controlled legislature can be consulted. They're doing this because there are 1.4 million people who now going to have the right to vote, including many African Americans. So the question is this, Reverend McCoy, I'll start with you. What the hell? This thing,
Reverend McCoy, what the hell?
Yeah, Reverend McCoy, what the hell? This thing was passed by Republicans and Democrats. It was to change the state constitution. The point of this referendum is to take it out of the hands of the Republican legislature, where they have a supermajority. So now all of a sudden, let's consult the legislature. Again, this is ignoring the will of the people.
I agree. It's one of those things that every situation you put, whether it's Wisconsin, North Carolina, Florida, that you've talked about today, all of those are real serious issues that I think need to be addressed. So I'm not backing down from it.
There's one key thing that's consistent. There's one key word.
And you're going to say Republicans. Now,
Michigan, Florida, Wisconsin, North Carolina. Right. The GOP.
Right. But the GOP is not monolithic, so there are people in the GOP that I think are very concerned about the issue. The point that people were able, right. They're not
in the Florida legislature where they're trying to legalize voter suppression.
Well, they helped pass the bill.
I mean,
and they actually helped understand that people that were incarcerated now have their rights restored to be able to put it in there.
What are you consulting the Republican state Senate for in Florida? What do they have to consult about? Whether there's 1.4 million, we're going to let them vote or not? Or can we do something before the Democrats take over? This is legalized voter suppression by the Republicans. It makes no sense. And I'm going to tell you, Roland, in North Carolina, 2 district attorneys in Baden County and the neighboring county, right, are both investigating this. And if they make an arrest, I think it'll send a message, not just not in North Carolina, but elsewhere, that whether you're Democrat or Republican, that district attorneys are certainly going to be investigating and prosecuting real voter suppression here.
Well, we got to have integrity in our judicial system as well as our election system. And when those guys investigate, and if our election system is wrong, and if it's fraudulent, it needs to be eliminated.
But see let them do it. Let them do it. What concerns me? Okay.
Everybody stop.
All right, everybody.
You mean everybody?
Everybody.
Oh,
he's from Texas. He's from Texas.
Everybody stop.
Figure like he's from D.C.
But I do want to say something about this, though.
Cleo, you're going to say something, but here's the thing. 10 years, Desmond Meade worked to get this on the ballot. Yep. I'm in Florida right now, in St. Petersburg, Florida, for 10 years.
Yep.
It passed. It needed to get 60% of the votes in the state, not a majority, 60%. It exceeded 65%. The point of changing the state constitution is to take it out of the hands of the legislature. So, Cleo, I'm just confused. What the hell is there to consult the Republican legislature for? No, the voters have decided.
Well, at the risk of being extremely redundant in terms of what I say on the show all the time, there you go again, being logical and breaking things down based on material facts. But these resistant people don't care nothing about all of that. They don't care. And getting back to, well, I want to just say to you, Reverend, that a perpetual disingenuousness that I keep seeing is with black Republicans saying, well, I disagree. But it's like nothing but lip service. Well, you said that you disagree with the corruption. You disagree with the...
I don't want to see corruption. Do you?
Well, you said you just a moment ago, you just said you disagree with something.
Meaning I disagree with fraudulent activity.
Exactly. And I'm saying that what I hear is people, similar to what you just did, disagreeing, but doing nothing beyond the verbal announcement of disagreement.
Remaining in the Republican Party
that's the assumption.
It's difficult to swallow.
But see, that's the assumption sometimes. We like to assume that just because somebody verbalizes something, they do nothing afterwards. I disagree on that issue because
so what have you done about the voter suppression in Florida or Milwaukee or North Carolina? Or what are you going to do? Tell us.
There we go.
Well, what have
Tell
you
us
done?
what are you going to do or what you have done?
Because
you're still a Republican.
Let him answer.
What's
he
the
just
point?
did. He laughed.
Right,
Reverend
because
McCoy,
I'm
go
hearing
ahead.
both of these guys on both sides ready to eat me alive on my answer because
I got
listen,
it. Give your
right
answer.
after what's that?
Go ahead, give your answer.
No, I'm just saying right afterwards, it's very simple to take an action forward, even from tonight, and say, you know what? Let me call a couple people. Let me try to begin to reach out. Let me begin to do some stuff that may help to push this along because I disagree with some of the activity. Now, on some of the points, there's some back end stuff that is being worked to make sure that some of these things do not happen. So,
hold on. I'm sorry. What we talking about?
I'm not. What we talking about?
Hold on. No. I don't speak in general.
Right.
When you say that on the back end, that's some stuff working on so the stuff don't happen.
Yeah.
What stuff?
No, I believe there are a constituency of people.
Belief?
Let me answer.
So
Finish
which one?
your thought, please. Go ahead.
Don't we got another topic? But go ahead. That's because obviously this is not a winnable issue. Because I'm sitting here almost with you guys saying, yeah, I agree. The fraudulent activity should be done. In North Carolina, it's not right. Understanding a little bit about Mark Harris, understanding about our constituency and network within that state of North Carolina in particular.
Stop.
Yes, sir.
Stop. We done with North Carolina. I'm talking
Which
about
one are we
Proposition 4 in Florida.
All right, there you go. Well, he brought up North Carolina again. So in Proposition 4 in North Carolina, it should be implemented, period.
What I don't understand about black Republicans is you have a Republican Party that endorses fewer people voting, engages in legal voter suppression, and you continue to be a part of that organization, whether you black, white, yellow, or brown. How do you all engage and embrace this myth of somehow they give you as a black person political power when they do nothing but have policies against black America?
Hey, hold up, stop. First of all, y'all
I recommend you starting another party, being independent, or come join us.
Stop.
Come join us.
Stop. You get stop it. You're getting off topic. Hold up. You're getting off topic. I'm gonna answer that question. I'm gonna answer that question before I go on. The same way, Scott, black Democrats continue to be political sharecroppers. The Democratic Party now hold the Democratic Party accountable when it comes to making sure we're getting our fair share of jobs.
You're not alone.
I'm not done.
Okay,
I am not done. The same way black Democrats don't say jack and jamming up Nancy Pelosi when it comes to employing black people on Capitol Hill and Chuck Schumer on the Senate side. The same way black Democrats don't kick the ass of Democrats when it comes to making sure proper dollars are going to black consultants, black posters, black event planners, black caterers, and black folks that way.
But when you say that makes neither one better. You're not making the argument better.
The reality is black Democrats and black Republicans should be standing up for black people in both parties. Now, here's a word from one of our sponsors. Hey, guys, I want you to write this website down. That is marijuanastock.org. That's marijuanastock.org. Now, I'm going to tell you why. As we transition into the holiday season, this is the time when we start thinking about giving and sharing. Sometimes the best gift you can give somebody is an opportunity that could potentially change their lives economically. That's why our friends at Transatlantic Real Estate have created an investment opportunity for the everyday investor. It involves legal marijuana and crowdfunding. No, we ain't trying to give you weed. We're trying to get you to make money off of weed. Now, we all know that legal marijuana has created one of the fastest growing industries in America, a multi-billion-dollar industry. We also know that crowdfunding makes it easy to be an early investor to get in on an opportunity. It really is a no-brainer. But it gets even better. Transatlantic Real Estate is different, and they have a business model that is simple to understand. They buy land that supports marijuana grow operations and lease it to licensed, high-paying tenants. Now, did you hear that? You are investing in the landlord of a licensed marijuana farm in a high-growth market. And for a limited time, you can invest as little as $300 up to $10,000 before the company goes public. Now, here's some more good news. They've recently extended the offer, which means you still have time if you take action now. Now, keep in mind, you must complete and confirm your application to participate. So be sure to complete the process. Now, look, don't spend all your money over the holidays and end up with empty pockets and buying stuff that you're not going to be able to use a year from now. Instead, get a return on your investment. You can also consider making an investment for someone special. How's that for a holiday gift? Yes, you're welcome. To get started, go to marijuanastock.org. That's marijuanastock.org to get in the game right now. All right, folks, we talk about investing. And, of course, for Americans, one of the greatest investments to build wealth has been home ownership. But there's been a segregation tax. Black folks know this very well. And, of course, and that's what social scientists call the undervaluation of homes in black neighborhoods. Now, on average, the same home in a white neighborhood is worth nearly $50,000 more than the same home in a black neighborhood. Overall, that's $156 billion in lost value for black homeowners. And that segregation tax has a big effect on what happens in those black neighborhoods. Joining us right now is the author of a new report detailing the damage from this. He's from the Brookings Institution's think tank. Joining us right now is Dr. Andre Perry, back to Roland Martin Unfiltered. Now, Andre, of course, we've heard about this in so many other areas, but to see these numbers and see what that means is stunning for some people, because you talk about wealth. Again, Americans have been able to improve wealth, home ownership, taking that money, reinvesting it, passing that money down through inheritance to their children. And so black folks have been getting the short end of the stick from the moment we were able to buy home.
Yeah, and when something goes wrong in the black community, people like to say it all starts at home. And what they are trying to say is that there's a cultural pathology in the black community. But the reality is that it does all start at home, but it's about the devaluation of black property. That $156 billion should be going into schools and other municipal services. It could pay for tuition. It would actually pay for more than 8 million college degrees at the public rate. It would fund more than 4 million businesses, given the rate that most black businesses start. It would have funded the entire Katrina recovery efforts. $156 billion changes lives. It's the money that's necessary to uplift our communities and individuals. And so it's an enormous number, and I'm glad that we have put the data out there, because some people look at it and say and get disheartened. I look at the numbers and say, hey, now we can name our price. You can go to brookings.edu, look up your metro area, and you can see the price difference. And because what's also encouraging, we know our homes are actually worth more than what they are priced, meaning that we should be investing more in our community. We should start businesses in our communities. We should take risk and improve our homes. The price is inaccurate. And this comes after very rigorous data. If you look at the report, we control for everything from crime, housing structures. We control for walkability, transportation, all the major neighborhood and housing structure variables. And what we find is that the devaluation, and it's an enormous number.
And again, we're talking real money. We're talking, but people have to understand, again, by lower valuation, when you turn around and sell it, that means somebody's actually buying the house cheaper than it really should be. And then that keeps you from being able to take that additional money and then save it, invest it, or buy another home that has a higher value. So again, imagine this happening 2 or 3 times, then over generationally as well. That means that black folks who have been owning homes from the 20s, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, now all of a sudden in the 21st century, we've been...
You know, I also want to emphasize that we've been criticizing black folk for not striving, not doing enough. But this shows that Black Americans are actually striving for the American dream, that we're actually doing everything we're told, but we're taxed for doing so. And it's debilitating our communities. I mean, these are current numbers. This is not numbers in which I'm bringing from a cumulative amount of sum over years. This is what's going on now. Our homes should be worth more.
Yeah, but Doctor, if I may, Roland, I got a quick question. I understand the devaluation and the undervaluation, right? But what I don't understand is it money that I can't see because I never receive it? So if I live in a $100,000 house and it's really valued at $50,000 and it's redlined, it's got all these other things, how can I miss what I can't measure because it never evaluated up until its proper number?
Well, one thing great about researching this report, now we can see. Before we've known that this is happening.
So how do I go get it back then?
No,
or can I?
You can, and know that once you see what you're worth, then it becomes about communities animating what's going on inside their community to project that their homes should be worth more. And so some of it is on us to say, hey, our homes are worth more. Let's put maybe it might be as simple as a fresh coat of paint. It might be, let's start a business in the community.
Right.
But the more we do to show that our homes are worth more, the greater the likelihood others will invest, and folks in the community will invest in themselves. It's a dire situation, but there's hope behind the numbers.
I have a question as well.
Cleo, Reverend McCoy, then we're going on. Cleo, go ahead with your question.
Does your report explicitly break down cause and effect and what has led to this de-evaluation of property so people can understand what the cause looks like and what the elements are so people can deflect that?
We've long known the cause to be segregation, racial housing covenants, redlining that led to a lack of investment. It's just that,
and this is in the report.
That's in the report. Those prices have reflect some of that. It's just, and the overall number is black homes, homes in neighborhoods where it's 50% black or more, are worth half as much as the same home in white areas. But it's when you control for all those other things, we also see that the price is lower than what it should be.
Right.
And so, yes, crime matters, education matters, all these things matter. But the concentration of blackness is lowering the price even further. It's almost as if people are saying, oh, there's 4 times more crime going on in that neighborhood. The homes are worse than what they should be, or what they are. The transportation hubs are worse than what they are. There's this projection of negativity that's lowering values more than what they should be.
So what happens if that black family moves to a white neighborhood? Does that devaluation follow them?
No, well, we looked at the concentration of blackness. So as long the whiter the community, the more you're coming close to market value rates.
Right.
And so it's the concentration of blackness matters.
Reverend McCoy, final question.
Yeah, from a quick one. From a policy standpoint, what can we do to improve that? Because I was participating in a town hall not too long ago in Chicago, and some of the representatives there didn't even understand it because we looked at the valuation of property there and in the west side and what it was right around the corner, and it was very different.
You know, a lot of the regulations that that occurred under the Obama administration have been eroded, and they were not perfect. What is clear, we do need race-based regulations. And some would have argued we deserve reparations based on these numbers.
Yeah.
However, it is clear that there needs to be race-based policies that address the housing market, the real estate agents, appraisals, which are some of the most loose standards, and you get a variability there, and lending. All those things are have so much subjectivity in it that it negatively impacts black folk all across the board.
All the time.
All right.
Yeah.
Doc, we certainly appreciate it, man. Thank you so very much. We'll definitely have you back on the show.
You're welcome.
All right, then. Okay, folks. Now, I got to now look, y'all know, I'm really trying not to have to sit here and keep calling out these crazy white folks in media. But they keep getting on my damn nerves. All right, so check this out. The New York Times columnist, opinion columnist, Ross Douthat. That's how it's pronounced, Jay? That's his name? Whatever. His name is Ross, okay? He's a conservative. Y'all, he wrote this column called Why We Miss the Wasp. Okay, now it was dealing with the death of President George H.W. Bush. Now here's an excerpt from his column. The nostalgia flowing since the passing of George H.W. Bush has many wellsprings. Admiration for the World War II generation and its dying breed of warrior politicians. The usual belated media affection for moderate Republicans. The contrast between the elder Bush's foreign policy successes and the failures of his son. And the contrast between any honorable politician and the current occupant of the Oval Office. But two of the more critical talkers takes on Bush nostalgia got closer to the heart of what was being mourned in distant hindsight with his death. Writing in The Atlantic, Peter Beinart described the elder Bush as the last president deemed legitimate by both of our country's warring tribes before the age of presidential sex scandals, plurality winning and popular vote losing chief executives, and white resentment of the first black president. Also in The Atlantic, Franklin Foer described the subtext of Bush nostalgia as a fondness for a bygone institution known as the establishment, heartened in the cold of New England boarding schools, acculturated by the late-night rituals of Skull and Bones, sent off to the world with a sense of noblesse oblige. For more than a century, this establishment resided at the top of the American caste system. Now it is gone, and apparently people wish it weren't. Now, I think you can usefully combine these takes and describe Bush nostalgia as a longing for something America used to have and doesn't really anymore. A ruling class that was widely, not universally, but more widely than today, deemed legitimate, and that inspired various kinds of trust, intergenerational, institutional, conspicuously absent in our society today. Put simply, Americans miss Bush because we miss the wasps, because we feel at some level that they're more meritocratic and diverse and secular successors. Ooh, I love this. Rule us neither as wisely nor as well. Let me unpack that. So what essentially he is trying to lay out is that you had white Anglo-Saxon Protestants like President George H.W. Bush, who ruled in a different way than those who followed him, including his son, including Bill Clinton, including Barack Obama, including Donald Trump. And when he says that we're longing for this, the issue that I have with this is that Ross was tweeting and he tried to say that, well, no, what I really meant by that is the service of these WASPs in terms of their commitment to public service. Well, here's why that is such a trash and trifling analysis by Ross. Because I can show you people like Frederick Douglass who gave service to America. I can show you people like Sojourner Truth who gave service to America. Ralph Bunche, the first African American to win the Nobel Peace Prize, gave service to America. I can show you the countless men and women. A. Philip Randolph, who led the first labor union of the Pullman Porters, who gave service to America. You don't have to give service to America being a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. See, what Ross also seems to somehow ignore is that America was created for white folks like President George H.W. Bush. That is, white landowners. See, it really wasn't even made for broke-ass white people. It really was for white landowners. Those were the people who were supposed to also vote in this country. And see, America likes those type of people because America was built on the basis of white supremacy. And so essentially what Ross is saying is that we long for the days of white supremacy, long for the days of when you have individuals who were educated in boarding schools and then, of course, educated at the elite institutions of Yale and Harvard and Columbia and Princeton, all the Ivy League schools. And I dare say, no, Ross, there are many other Americans who have given their lives of service to this country who didn't go to Yale but who went to Howard, who didn't go to Princeton but who went to Spelman, who didn't go to the boarding schools, who went to public schools, individuals who understand also what it means to be American. So no, Ross, we don't long for the days of WASP. running America. We actually long for the days of when individuals who live in real America, America who's actually had to deal with something, folks who didn't get hooked up as a result of their white privilege, folks who also did not use their white privilege to get their children in schools that they didn't have the grades to get into. Even George W. Bush admitted so in 2004 when I was one of the 4 journalists who questioned him at the Uni Journalists of Color Convention in Washington, D.C. And the problem that I really have with that piece is the New York Times is run by a black man, Dean Beckett. So how does America long for the day when WASP ran the country when the first time in the history a black man is your boss at the New York Times? Not a black man saying, yes, boss, but a black man said, yes, I am the boss. See, the real issue, and I keep telling y'all, and at some point y'all gonna realize this, is that the problem that we have, white folks are fearful of the future. They are fearful of America, where the WASP will not be controlling this country, where we are not going to have the day that every time this is a Supreme Court nominee, they're going to come from Harvard or Yale. They actually might come from law schools at TSU or Howard University or Florida A&M. See, that's actually real America. See, if you read this article, and I really tried to understand what the hell he was saying, besides it being extremely poorly written, is that we don't long for the days of folks like George Herbert Walker Bush. In fact, he even took a shot in the piece where he said that Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, in many ways, operated in the same vein as the WASP. Well, because see, here's why, Ross, because the WASP constantly tell us we've got to act like them. The WASP tell us if you want to be accepted, you must go to the schools that we go to. You must dress like us. You must talk like us. You must walk like us. That's also perpetuating white supremacy, Ross. That's what you don't seem to quite understand. So no, I don't long for the days of WASP running America. In fact, I long for the days when we have people who come from other places who don't get us into wars we should not be in with people who are brown because they somehow want to control their oil or somehow want to control their natural resources. See, that's actually the history of the WASP. The WASP also are the ones who ran Native Americans off of their land and decimated their history and decimated their people. See, that's also a history I don't quite long for. It's also the WASP who also denied black folks opportunities during the period of Jim Crow and after slavery. That to me is also the days I don't long for. I don't long for the days of Dred Scott. I don't long for the days of Plessy versus Ferguson. I don't long for the days when Heman Sweat had to sue the University of Texas and they created a black law school now as called Texas Southern University because they couldn't get to the University of Texas. I don't long for the days when black folks had to be led into the University of Mississippi with federal troops. All be filtered by joining our Bring the Funk fan club. Go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. We certainly would appreciate if you would support us with your dollars. This is, of course, an independent show. No company owns us, doesn't control us. We make our own decisions to be able to talk to you, provide for you of information that you need. Tomorrow I'll be broadcasting from New York City, where I'll be on a panel tomorrow morning talking about the future of TV news. So we certainly look forward to bringing you more insightful commentary and information that black folks need, that black folks desire, and frankly, that mainstream media, broadcasting cable, will not give you. All right, y'all take care. I'll see you later. Holla!